This podcast is brought to you by UConnect, the creator of the first all-in-one virtual career center. Scale your impact and engage more students with a platform that puts all of your career resources in one place. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Career Everywhere podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Metzger, and for this episode, I want to share a recent live session from the Career Everywhere community hosted by Gerald Tang of Bridgewater State University. In the session, Gerald presents about how his team built a successful employer engagement strategy that aligns with BSU's mission and priorities. He shares how they use data to guide their decisions, what lessons they've learned along the way, and he offers actionable tips for other career leaders who want to implement a similar model on their campuses. This was a great presentation and our community members loved it. So I wanted to share it here on the podcast too. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you everyone for joining us for this live session with the amazing Gerald Tang from Bridgewater State University. As we go through, if you have thoughts, feel free to put them in the chat. If you have questions, there is a Q&A feature as well. You should be able to see a little thumbnail for it at the bottom of the screen. So you can put questions in there as well, but I will also monitor the chat for any questions. I believe there are some interactive elements to Gerald's presentation, right, Gerald?
Yep, sounds good.
So as we hit those, you can respond in the chat. We'll go from there. So Gerald, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Meredith, and hello, everybody. So good to see folks joining the call and excited about this topic. I do have a small deck to help guide us for today's conversation, and I'm excited to kind of share this topic with you as I was embarking on these questions throughout this past year. So excited to be here. And hello, for those of you who did not have a chance to meet, my name is Gerald Tang. I'm currently serving as the Executive Director of Career Services and Internship Office here at Bridgewater State University. And I will jump right in because it will give you some context about my organizations and institution and so forth in just a second. A bit about me, I had really interesting background in a variety of institutions. I think that's important context for today's conversations as I have sort of exposed myself into different kinds of settings, particularly working with employer from a small Catholic institutions to a selective institution to a large and public, private, and so forth and so on. So have a little bit of experience. I wouldn't call myself an expert in any way, shape, or form. This is probably experience coming from experience and from my own perspective. I'm a product of a public education system from both my undergrad and my master's degree are in public institutions, and my doctorate degree is a private regional institution as well. And some of you may wonder, like, why there's an asterisk at the bottom of some of the institutions? Those are places that I've done internship in, whether or not during my undergrad year or my graduate school time as well. So I put them in those brackets. With that in mind, love to kind of share a little bit about what we're hoping to talk about today. I'm hoping by today's sessions, many of you will be able to identify one way to enhance your own employee engagement strategy and outreach. I'm hoping that you are able to learn one way to define engagement tier. Perhaps that's a model you want to use or create your own models based on what we have experienced this particular year as we work on refining our own employee engagement efforts here at Bridgewater State University. I use the word BSU interchangeably. So if you hear the word BSU, I'm referring to Bridgewater State University for this context. And I'm hoping that by the end of today, you're able to identify at least two data sources to inform and refine your employer engagement plans. So let's jump right in. Like Meredith said, I would love for us to have this as a conversation. So at some point, we'll be asking you all to type in the chat with some of your thoughts and questions as well. So a bit about Bridgewater State University. We're one of the Massachusetts State College and University systems. We are different than the UMass system. For those of you who are maybe familiar with the UMass system, we are a separate system than the UMass system, but we have many colleges also located within our system with the state colleges and university, that including our community college system as well. We founded in 1840. So we are currently celebrating 185 years here at BSU. With about 9,000 and change students, we're aiming to go back to about 10,000 student populations. That's one of our institutional goals. And like I mentioned, we have a variety of sector. We grounded from our Teachers College root. It was founded as a Teachers College. but we're currently expanding into variety types of colleges and offering. We have over 100 plus majors and minors, and we have many different schools within colleges within the university systems here at BSU. And we are located in Southeast Massachusetts. For folks who may not be familiar geographically, we are sort of the center point between Boston, Providence, and Cape Cod. So if you're kind of putting those triangle together, we're sort of in the middle points in between all those three areas as well. One of the unique things about BSU is that many of our students consistently for the last 10 years, our data source has suggested that over 90% of our students graduated from BSU remained in Massachusetts or the New England region. So that's an important point, reference point as we guide our conversation for today. 68% of our students are commuters, with 32% of our students are residents staying on campus during their time at BSU. We are a centralized career services operations here at Bridgewater State. We recently merged between two offices. Historically, in the past, was separated from career services and internship program office. They're two separate entities within the university. I was being brought on to work to merge two practices together back into one centralized operations with the renewed commitments under the umbrella of BSU Works, which is a larger university initiative to prepare the university and students to be career ready and the career everywhere mindset. Currently, we have 11 full-time staff members, 3 part-time staff members, primarily focused on advising and also working with our operation area for part-time staff. 1 grad assistants and 9 student staff. Those are primarily focused on marketing effort that support our marketing elements for the student staff here. As far as our employee relations team is concerned, we have a couple of people who are wearing multiple hats, including myself. We have an assistant director, associate directors of employee engagement and outreach. Their primary role is to work with the employer strategies, supporting our employee engagement program and activities. They also do see students. We are all hands on deck approach because of the size of our institutions and our student need. We do have an associate directors of data and operations. That person's really support the employer relations teams with data information, handshake system management, and obviously data utilization as well. We also have our associate directors of internship and career development. That basically is our advising arm of the office. Because the person's overlap with internship, that person's also support some of the elements pertaining to the internship hiring and data tracking from the employer perspective as well. So today's session is about crafting an employee engagement strategy from our vantage point, our landscape. I want to be clear, we are not here to tell you you're going to craft the entire strategy by the end of today's sessions. We're really helping you to prompt. I'm just sharing my experiences as we go on a journey to really understanding some of these key questions. I'd love for us to have a chance to think about that. If someone asks you, what are some of your top employers? I wonder, how would you answer that questions? Prompt, this is the time that you want to type in the chat. Let's say a parent asks you that questions. How would you define that? Who are some of your top employers? I'm glad to see that some of you are really assessing and refining your top employers approaches, which is excellent. I'm happy to share my journey here at BSU about how we did that and what the lessons learned as we go through today's presentations. But keep putting on your chat information. When I come on board, I recently joined BSU about a little bit less than 2 years now. And the first questions, as I'm learning about the operations here and trying to merge two offices together, and the first questions, the prompt to me is, how do we sort of define our strategy? And we were to share who are our top employer, what are the key metrics. One thing I discovered is that many of our colleagues provide different answer. Some of them may say, well, I have a list of employers that I can pick up the phone and ask, which is a great approach. However, that is more individualized rather than if I ask another person, that list may not be the same and may not be consistent with what the previous person have shared. So as I continue to navigate this journey, I noticed that this is really kind of lofty and general and hard to define. So I'm starting to work with the team on how we can truly refine that so that it's not just an individual approaches and what I believe are the top employer versus my colleague beliefs are. How can we craft something that might be more institutionalized or more of the collective focus? So that prompted at something I actually started by looking around to see what other colleagues are actually doing. So I put in a survey out to many colleagues in my region and asked similar questions. What example offering do you use to engage with employer? Because if folks asking top employers based upon interactions, then I want to see, okay, career fair could be one example of it. What else do they do? And many of them respond back with, well, they have a lot of kind of site visit, employee spotlight, panel events, networking, employee residence. Some of them might be guest speaking at their programs and activities, staff training. That's helpful to see. Marking a few coffee chat. One thing I notice here is a lot of them center around event focus, which is fine, but I keep prompting in my head the questions of, does event equivalent to relationship? And that's the question that really start to simmer in my head on how do we understand that is interactions equivalent to key employer, top employers. And that's something that I continue to learn about as I'm reading through some of these benchmarks. And I pose an additional questions. How do you develop an employer engagement models in your institutions? I'm glad to see some of them have tier approaches in looking at employer. Some of them look at it once a while alongside with their own strategic planning process or their year-long planning process. Some of them based on outcomes data, which is aligned with what many of you have been sharing in the chat about. And others, surprisingly, doesn't have a response to that. These are just a couple of them that came through. And oftentimes they're like, well, we really don't have one, or, well, this is not a priority, which is an interesting observation that I do notice, especially in a crowded area in the Northeast, with so many institutions around the area working to recruit great students, talents coming from similar regions. It begs the questions, what makes us unique, right? What makes your model unique? What makes your institution unique? So I continue to explore those two questions as we go through the journey of refining it on our end. I also further ask the questions of what are some of the indicators for success? Like how to define that is working or not working. One thing that coming from a quick anecdote here, many of them also go back to event attendance and traffics, interviews and hire and outcomes. So I always say to colleague then is again, reaffirming the questions of event attendance equals relationship. I keep using a sort of dating approach. Does going on number of dates equals marriage proposal? I wonder that question sometimes, right? Does it mean if I'm going on a date with an individual for 20 times, that means this person's definitely going to be a marriage proposal coming along? Some may say no, because I don't know the person's need and I don't know the person's values and priorities. And do I know myself what is working or what is not working? How do I define where we now get to the point of the relationship being fruitful and meaningful? So I started to really work with my team here to understand that process on knowing how can we gather insights with our employer base to understand their needs and at the same time understanding our need to find a mutually beneficial way to refine our model and our approach. So, and questions also, as I'm talking to my colleagues about what makes our school different. We have many other states, institutions within our regions. I'm not talking about the UMass system. I'll talk about the private institutions within our area. Many of them are sharing similar things. We are great for students to come here to learn. We are here to support our local workforce. Some of them might say that we are here to train leaders of the world. Yet the question is that similar when I'm going through one website to the others. And uniquely, as you've seen from previous benchmark, that many of them are saying similar things. So again, it's similar in my head. The questions are, what makes our institution different? And how may my strategy support the missions of the institution? And remember, I mentioned earlier, I have opportunity and privilege to work in a variety of school and settings. And oftentimes I always go back to, does my work connect back to the value of the institution? If so, how from employee engagement perspective? How may I connect the dots? An example that I always draw from is if I'm working in a school that have students coming from all parts of the country or the world, my strategy in my mind should be, how can I be able to connect in a wider net from students who may be interested in working across the world? And if our focus is training future leaders, how might we now work with our employer partners to focus and center back to that particular mission? I don't know, and I'm still remain unclear with that questions, whether or not many of our colleagues in this space are actually thinking from that vantage point, and versus looking at who are the top employer, who are the largest employer, who might be the employer from the Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 company list. What follow-up questions are always also thinking about is how may you employ this new strategy to support the changes in your institution? As we know that currently there's many challenges that we all experience in higher education and even in the private sectors and the employment sectors. How do we now start changing our strategy to really support that? If so, how do we continue to refine and how often do we refine some of these as well? So these are the questions that continue to surface as I was working with my colleagues here to refine our employer engagement approaches, an area to think about. Questions so far is how do we do that? So the first thing we then do is starting to looking at our SWOT analysis in approaching our employee engagement strategy. Looking back at the institution at the university here at BSU, what are our strengths? So as I mentioned earlier in the profile of the university, we are a public institution. It has a particular story. 90% of our students came from Massachusetts and graduated and retained in Massachusetts. So evidently, we have a strong alumni support network in the region. And that is one of the strengths of our institution. We have been here for over 185 years. That's fantastic. That means there are some reputations of alumni staying or remaining in the region. If that's the case, means likelihood that I may be able to come across a alumni from the institutions will likely be surrounding in this area. We have an institutional initiative that focus on career readiness and think about career everywhere approach under the umbrella of BSU Works. That is an initiative that coming from President's office. So that's a strength, which means that it might create an opening, an opportunity for us to start to reimagine many aspects of our work, including the work that's happening in my office, and in particular in this conversation, the work with employer. So it's not a surprise for me to jump across different colleagues and say, hey, how do you work with your employer base? How do you partner with alumni in spaces? When I'm using the framework of BSU work, it creates more of a connection point rather than a questions of that I'm trying to push the door open. Now, there are certainly challenges, as many institutions might experience that as well. In my end, we come across many silos. From an especially employee engagement strategy, from this perspective, many academic departments might work with their own alumni basis. Maybe a students of their, former students come back to the institutions, offering a lecture, offering a program. Maybe they mentioning that they have an opportunity, and then the faculty members share within their class. So these silos of scenario continue to happen within our institutions. And one of the other challenges is that we historically and continue to be rooted in the teacher's college philosophy, yet many of other outsiders are not aware that, or may not be as familiar with, I should say, with some of the new offering that happening at the universities. For example, we recently opened up a cybersecurity program. A cyber range is available within our institution. That is something that not a lot of people are aware of. And we are now trying to think about ways to push out information related to the new offering that might be aligned with some of the critical needs happening in this region. We do not have a corporate engagement persons within the university. At least as of today, I don't know that. I don't know we have. So, which also opened up an interesting dialogue that I had recently with our alumni and investment teams about how they approach corporate giving and corporate engagement perspective. And that is an ever continuous conversations that we are learning and navigating with each other on what that might look like. And I mentioned earlier, we are in southeastern Massachusetts. Within 30 minutes of drive, you can hit at least 4 institutions within my area. If you expand the reach with 50 to 100 miles within my campus radius, you hit hundreds of institutions within Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, and so forth, and even Connecticut that you can probably reach. With many, many institutions are looking at basically the same populations and basically the same types of students and employer as well. So that could be a weakness from our end if our reputations of the institution are not continuing to be renewed or in people's mind or employers' mind. Now that's a question that we need to kind of work through. Wasn't the opportunity we noticed? We recently have a new university level strategic plan that has been in place since December of last year. So we now have more institutional buy-in. We have an opportunity for new leaderships. We also have institutional investment that fall under the BSU Work Initiative in thinking about ways to elevate the university for future workforce. One of the unique things about BSU is that we are an equity-minded institution from the university level. So it is something that we continue to look at. How can we ensure that all of our students have access to opportunity, regardless where the upbringing come from, regardless the backgrounds and so forth. It's our commitment as a university level to think about our work from an equity lens as well. We actually have a racial justice equity task force that is university-wide that focus on working with all departments in thinking about ways to make our work towards more equitable outcomes. Some of the threats, as you can imagine, and during this interesting time, I would say, obviously the economic impact of uncertainty, what's happening from the federal government to the local to the regions, how that might impact the different changes in our employee engagement strategies and how we can connect with our employer to understand their ever-changing needs can be a difficult part of our formula. We're also looking at financial constraints. Obviously, we don't know what might come down the pipe regarding our resources, infrastructure pieces. We're financially healthy at the moment, but that can change overnight. So one of the things that as we think about employee engagement strategy is how can we ensure that we have the adequate support to ensure the executions of our employee engagement strategy is working and is supporting the needs for all constituents group. As you may recall, we have about close to 10,000 students who have 11 full-time staff members that work with all parts of the career services operation. So you can imagine that we, like any given time, all of us are working in different projects, different initiatives, focus on different priorities. That is something that is a challenge for us as a state institutions, and it's something that we recognize, and we have to be proactive, thinking about ways to address that as we're designing our employee engagement model. So as we go back to that, I encourage you all to think about, at some point, looking back at your institutional strategy or your departmental strategy, ask yourself, how can I apply the SWOT models in looking at your current employee engagement model? And also keep going back to ask the question that I posed earlier as well. How is the strategy different than a school next door or similar type of institutions? How does your strategy support the missions, if any, to make your institution unique and your unique offering to be interesting and stand out? How might you employ strategy to support the changes happening in your institution? These remain the three questions that we continue to refine even as of today, to keep going back at our employer engagement model in thinking about ways to enhance and improve our approach as well. So what we then do is creating a multi-tiered definitions of our relationship. We start by thinking about these 5 areas. The first thing is looking at who are our prospective employers. And not just saying that prospective from a very general term, we define more specifically employers that are not currently engaging with the university in any way. And the second tier is employer who only engage with job postings with no insight into hiring, campus engagement, or any involvements. That will be the second tiers. The third tiers are the partners tiers, where employers are engaging in a few career events, hiring students throughout the year, but participate in other types of work that is also happening within the institutions. And one of the things that we start to throw in the questions within the team is, and how can we now engage partners that align with our efforts that are happening here that are equity minded? And how do we assess that? How do we engage that? That remains a question that we continue to refine within our tier model as well. We're then looking at the tier 4 model of who are our true partners? Who are those individuals who truly engage with us in many ways, not just in events and programs, but really supporting our academic endeavors, maybe serving on an advisory board across institutions, maybe part of our efforts to connect students, not just for the first hire, but truly retain alumni within their organizations and their operations, and also proactively sharing what their needs are alongside with what our plan for our future growth within the university. We also added the last tiers of relationship that no longer valuable for our university. That is the sticky part of it. Part of it is many people say, well, we don't want to just say no to an employer. And my question is, why not? If an employer consistently asking for a particular need and request, and we continue not addressing and be able to meet that request. An example will be if a healthcare system within my region consistently only want to engage with us and we're offering, let's say, nursing opportunity, and our university currently do not have nursing program, and there's no plan of going into creating a nursing program, why do we want to keep holding on that relationship? So that is a question that it's a little bit tricky to navigate, especially when we're going externally to our outside of departments, talking to colleagues about. But it's a helpful conversation starter to ask them why we want to keep those relationships as part of our model. And really asking questions to unpack their reasoning was super helpful from our end. So some of the lessons learned when we initially created this model, one, it helped us to organize ourselves internally on who our relationship and what made that look like. One of the challenges, it become a massive spreadsheet of basically, imagine we are handshake school, thousands and thousands of employer post opportunity, our outcome data, our insight, all thrown into this spreadsheet. So it becomes a very gigantic spreadsheet of any sort, which is great, but also is hard to navigate. And it got into dialogue of whether or not are we looking at the industry or looking at those employees who are hiring through the job category. That is questions that we starting to surface. Does one employee in the not-for-profit sectors, the relationship that we have with them is equivalent to the employer in the government sectors that have a relationship with us, but in different approaches? And that is a question that has started to surface up more as we went on, continue on this journey to understand our approach. And like I mentioned earlier, no different than any others, many of their discovery center around events. Well, they come to a fair, they join our networking event, they supported our mock interview program, they help with, this particular workshop, that particular workshop. Again, it goes back to the questions that does event engagement truly equal to meaningful relationship? My short answer is no, but it's more. It needs to be more within that formula as we look through the journey and defining that relationship. So just give you a sense, this is what it looks like. I'll just give you a snapshot. Obviously, I can't fit the entire spreadsheet onto the screen, but it was super helpful to kind of like seeing how that might manifest initially as we go through that. So then we realizing, well, the spreadsheet is not helpful. So what do we do? The questions then become, because we're only using certain data points, we need to open up our data sets a lot more intentionally by bringing in meaningful data to help inform our process. So what we end up doing is look at multi-source of data to start to refine our practice, our model. So some of them including handshake data. Like I mentioned earlier, we are handshake school. So we obviously look at job posting as a factor, but we're looking at multi-year job posting. So not just one-off job posting that we have to engage what the pattern looks like. Then we have access to our internship for credit data that is in the university level. So each department may have internship for credit program. They will report that data up to the registrar office. We now have access to those 10 years data. And we now utilize the data to see who are the people actually hiring them and how does that connect with or not connect with our handshake posting data as well. We also look at our BSU alumni data on LinkedIn. That was super helpful for us as we think about, well, with so many alumni staying in the region, we gotta need to see who are the employer who are actually retaining these alumni. And if so, for how long do they retain those alumni in the regions? So that was helpful to pull those data sets into the model, into the mix. We then start to also look at our first destination survey data. I'm sure many colleagues here are using that data as well. What are the outcomes of our students and where do they go? One thing we also add into is our enrollment trend data. We starting to work with our admission office to say, hey, where are you recruiting students from now? And what are the regions that we should start looking at more closely to create possibility and pipeline for future employment options for employer that might be willing to or interested in having students who are coming back in that particular region. So that data set has now been entered into our model. And we're also looking at our curriculums. What are the new programs that's coming down the pipe? What are our colleagues talking about regarding new programs on new degree offerings happening at the university? We're starting to look at what might they be and what a unique offering that they're hoping that programs aim at to help inform who are the prospect employer in particular that we now added onto the lineup. Obviously, working closely with President's office, we do have an individual in the President's cabinet that work with sort of government relations role. So that person has been super helpful to see where maybe the institutions are moving and direction they're going and help to shape who are the key relationship we want to move from tier 2 to tier 3 or tier 3 to tier 4. We also added insight for the trustees folks and many of the advisory board that we slowly discovered individual program might have advisory board members serving in those capacity. And we start to look at how are those company or organizations are supporting it outside of serving in the advisory board. One thing I love, not a shameless plug, but it is a shameless plug for UConnect is we have the model for the labor market data within our UConnect website. So why not using what we have already available and start to include the Lightcast data under the UConnect module for those insight and data point to see what are the trends happening in our regions, especially we are state institution with the regional focus. That is available data for us to consider to look at as well. As long as the local market data, what's going on in the southeast of Massachusetts, what's going on with the Boston City area, which is the capital of Massachusetts, and what might be information that we can now blend into the work that's happening in our space. Many individuals might be serving in our local chambers. What are the regional chambers and who are the members of those active chambers? Those are also helpful places for us to start to bring into our formula as well. And most important, I would say one of the key aspects that we're starting to do is asking for more feedback from our students. So we employ the Universum data. It's a survey that we work with external partner Universum to help us to collect some of those student feedback. We also house a town hall just to have students share with us a little bit of insight of what kinds of employer type, what type of programs, what kinds of employer they want to see coming to campus or engaging with the work that's happening here at the university, which lends itself very nicely with the faculty and staff input of their quote-unquote secret drawer, who are the relationship that are happening in their secret drawer that we can now help them to make the relationship even more meaningful and more helpful. And lastly, but not obviously not least, the institutional strategy and priorities remains important part of it. How can we now align the employee engagement strategy to the larger university plan and effort? If our work continues to center around equity-minded practices, how can we now think about our employee engagement strategy with the equity-minded lens as we engage our different employers? So that is also an important factor that we now utilize. So what is it? We discovered that a massive spreadsheet is not helpful. So we now, in recent time, we moved that into a industry-specific employer engagement audit. We found that specific regional audit or industry-specific audit was more helpful rather than trying to blend different industry together into one spreadsheet that it's hard to find and hard to understand. We now focus on very subset of sectors. We completed one with the healthcare sectors. We're looking at the healthcare employee within the regions and using the previous data source I mentioned earlier to blend into those tier model to help us to understand, to unpack the relationship that we have with that. As I mentioned earlier, we are a state institutions with a regional focus that support the local workforce. With many students and alumni coming from the regions, we start to think about how can we make it easy to start to target who are the prospect and the key relationship that might be supporting this particular commitment, which we end up rolling out in a campaign called Hire Locally, with the way in which we center a public message that we want to work with local employer in this particular region. This was particularly helpful when we're trying to address questions across and say, how come this one Fortune 500 company are not recruiting at BSU? We now have a more concrete reason to explain to our colleagues and say, although we really value those relationships with large employer, the question is, does these large employer have regional offices within our area that our students are excited about and our alumni will find it valuable? And if the question is no, that's the questions that will become our secondary tier rather than our key employer initiative within our space. we're starting to think about a better formula in adding what may be engagement more than just a event focus to design our partnership. By the way, I was a math minor, so you can probably see a lot of math formula come through from my presentation. So we're starting to define maybe we should include events plus outcome, and what might be some of the ways in which they integrate their learning, their needs to our resource and support with the career integrations. And maybe they serve on advisory capacity for providing us two-way feedback so that we understand their evolving needs. At the same time, they also understand our unique students populations. And obviously, the length of our relationship is that a new relationship versus it has been with us for 10 years and they truly understand what we do and our unique offering. That equals to partnership. This is a better formula from my vantage point in working with our team to say, how can we start to move employer from one tiers to the others? Organically, we end up forming our own informal versions of a employee engagement council. This is something that we are in the work as we speak to start to open up for colleagues across and say, hey, how can we bring people together to start to understand our approach and also expand the way in which we can learn more about their input, their insight in their employer base that we might not be familiar with. So we now have more coordinated effort when we're reaching out to employer, not just reaching out on my office behalf versus on the other office behalf, but we're reaching out on behalf of the entire university. And as a result of that, we started to develop a strategy in creating a more structured process when we connect with employer. We're starting to ask more concrete questions, not just who you're trying to hire, what the opportunity that you have. Beyond that, we're asking more questions like, are you committed to hire students locally to support our missions that we are regional focused? Many of our students are commuters, like I mentioned earlier. We start to ask, do you offer public transportation or access to parking? How difficult might that be for students to get to your facility? And that was helpful information to even helping employer to start to refine the posting to add some of these elements to strengthen their applications list as well. Do you have opportunity that align with our academic offering? That is key as we think about our model to refine it more holistically and seeing what the best alignment that works. How do you retain entry-level talents, and how do you also grow their talent outside of the entry-level positions? As a result of that, we're starting to work with the university to launch a new campaign that the university helped to focus on changing that institutional image. And our new website was shown. And here's a website that was built from our marketing communications office with the focus on tackling the institutional image mindset. How can we now start to highlight the university impact in front of our legislators, our key government officials, and our businesses within our state capital to start to think about position BSU as a place not just for teachings and not for profit spaces or social workers, but also a place that they can find talents for research, for sciences, for our business community, for our business students, and even our liberal arts students as well. As a result, we created this entire website. The university launched a few $1 million campaigns to roll out the BSU work to highlight specifically the cyber security program as well, and also highlighting some of the sample sectors that our business community may not be familiar with that we actually had graduates working in as well that tie to our impact data, our outcomes data, along with businesses. I'm going to share this really quick ad that was ran through TV campaign, for example.
Water State University is not just in the education business. BSU elevates business. Industry leaders hire BSU graduates for in-demand jobs in cybersecurity, engineering, finance, and every other field on the rise. BSU grads are trained in top-tier facilities and tested through hands-on internships. When BSU grads enter the Massachusetts workforce, they don't leave it, they lead it. Elevating business in Boston and beyond, BSU works.
So some of the people may ask me questions. Why Boston? As I mentioned earlier, we are public institutions with state capitals is Boston. So although we are very close to our colleagues, our fellow sister states in Rhode Island, our focus remained to center around Boston area with a couple of reasons. This campaign specifically focused on targeting for our business community and legislators and key government officials. So this is not really targeting our student prospective parents population, although that could be a secondary benefit when we roll out these campaigns as well. But the important part of this work is really to highlight some of the ways in which engagement can happen when businesses and local employers start to engage with the work that we do. And one of the things I appreciated about is because we're doing the employee engagement audit and sharing some of these key insights, the marketing communication team starting to link some of the resources through the Wayne website to our general website, which is on our UConnect website. And we created a Hire Locally campaign. This is a full campaign that we were able to put together and thanks to UConnect and the virtual site to showcase what is the purpose of the Hire Locally campaigns for both the regions, for students. So we create now a creator kit on our handshake system so that students can just click on Hire Locally, be able to see what are the opportunity within 70-mile radius, because many of our students are commuters, that they don't have to screen through every single possible opportunity in the sector, but they can look at regional focus to highlight opportunity in our space. We also highlighting why this is an important factor for us to consider when we think about our regional focus in our employee engagement strategies. And then how can we support them in ways that they can connect with us? So that was helpful as a result of the products that the university already planned on doing. We're just adding some more insight into the work as well. So to jump back on, we will have some time for questions. So this is the time for you. If you have questions you want to add on to the Q&A box, feel free to do so as well. So this is an example of a snapshot of a spreadsheet for the healthcare sector. Our strategy, like I mentioned earlier, focus now on how can we create these industry learning through different sectors. So we're starting to group our sector based on our community models within UConnect and grouping different sectors that are aligned with academic programs. And one thing you'll notice instantly, we're adding more notes about what their engagement has been. Hire Locally, one of the Hire Locally employers, as indicated to confirm whether or not these are employee relationships they want to continue to go or not going. And then we also adding information about what engagement note. Do they actually recruit students? Do they actually serve on advisory? Are they interested in doing those type of work that support the missions of the institution? So what's next from our end? We ultimately love to work on an employee engagement dashboards by industries, maybe something that will work with UConnect team once we are ready for this data, and think about how can we display that information by industry sectors so that individual, whether or not students, prospective students or parents, our faculty and staff, our employee and alumni can see what our touch point might look like for each of the sectors and understanding how we define this particular strategy. We are hoping to expand our offering to have more industry-specific employment engagement and employee engagement staffing structure to support those efforts so that our team's starting to look at that particular sector and be able to connect with the trend and the growth in those spaces. We're hoping to expand on our employee champions programs. I'm sure that many institutions may already have those. We're starting to find ways to celebrate those and really focus on supporting their strategy and the business need while simultaneously supporting our needs and our institutional needs. This is a time where we're also starting to look at how do we really assess those relationships. To be quite honest, doesn't have a clear answer yet. How do we truly assess the quality of those relationships? And how do we remove that from an individual relationship with potentially one employer recruiting contact or one particular individual, but take that into a institutional level or an organizational level? And we have continued to refine our tier model. One of the interesting discovery as we were working on we finished with the healthcare sector. We're starting to work in the art industry, and we instantly discovered that we don't have a lot of relationship either in the prospect space and also either in the true partner space. So that was super helpful for me as I'm trying to work with our colleagues within academic spaces to say, hey, who are we missing? And what does our program offer that might help position us as a university into the art community? So that was super helpful, even though we don't have a lot of current insight that was shared, but data point was helpful for us as we navigate that as well. I think that's the last slide. I want to leave some time for Q&A. Here's my contact information. If you want to connect and want to chat with me or want to talk more, want to say how much cool, innovative things you guys are doing, I certainly welcome those discussions as well. So I'm going to stop sharing so you can see Meredith. Hello again.
Hello. That was awesome, Gerald. I feel like you just gave us all your secret sauce.
Not secret because it's not unique for me, right? But I guess the key lessons for me is we often just go at the go, 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 go scenario. So how often can we step back and say, wait, what are we doing? And why are we doing this way? And that's a key lessons learned for me. So nothing here is secret. So take them as you want. If you want to model them, be my guest. Collectively, we are helping to support the workforce. So let's see. Dana asked, what are your most effective methods for engaging prospective employer? That's a very good question. One thing we discovered that it really depends on the industry sectors. Some industry sectors prefer just direct outreach when I need. I will reach out to you scenario. But oftentimes we starting to center around the questions of what are our students' need? Is the prospective employer came from and stem from the program alignments along with the student interest or the faculty input. And those has been helpful information as we reach out to these prospective employers and say, here the offering that we can provide to support their talents and their needs. That was being brought up upfront rather than say, hey, I want to work with you. How can we make this work without the context? So we provide the context upfront, and that has been helpful to drive those excitements and prospect into a conversation. Ali said, how do you handle employers that want more engagement but do not believe they're in alignment with your goals? It sounds like it's where we might be in the tier where they want more, but we may not be able to offer scenario. And sometimes we just have to be honest. And I have honest conversation and say, well, I appreciate you reaching out to us about these opportunity or ways to engage. Here are the things that we are looking for. Here are the things that our institution offer and our student demographic or alumni interest. All of those data sources I just mentioned earlier, those are helpful things to help them to understand why some of the engagement might not land their priorities and goal. So instead of me saying to them, sorry, I don't really like working with you anymore, now we have more of the data backing to support those efforts. So that has been helpful in that way. And then one thing I'll also do is because we're part of the system, we share opportunity. We don't have a program that aligns. Maybe we direct them to other colleagues in the regions for program that actually of interest for them. And we have personally referred them to connect with lovely colleagues in the region as well. Hope that answered your questions.
Gerald, it looks like Mark in the Q&A thing, he asked if we can see or get those spreadsheet headings somewhere.
Sure. Happy to share that. Meredith, I think you have the slide deck. You can just even pull that slide deck with that heading.
I'll put that here in the chat, but also in the comments on the event, so you can go check it out later too.
Awesome. Thank you for catching that. Any other questions? Rebecca asked me, how did you make the case to BSU to create employer-facing pages? We are open for business in other way. Oh, the employer pages. The beauty is I don't have to ask. They just like, well, it looks like there is an audit for one of the things that we talked about is the weakness pieces, institutional image. That was resonating with them. So the VP of Marcom and say, well, we need to do something about it. So let's position our approach differently. What might be the key data source we want to highlight? So that as a result created that entire campaign. So I wasn't involved in the full execution process, but we were involved in terms of the messaging itself. So they end up taking the lead in running that and creating an employee-facing page. Dana said, have you had an employee who say they do their own events, you can't get to engage with you individually? I'm assuming you meant like their own, let's say, open houses and programs. If that's the case, then I would say, we open for that. It doesn't necessarily link it into our employee engagement model, but those are helpful information for us to know. So we might not move an employee from one tier to the other. We might still keep them into the same category as an eye out for it, because that's helpful for our students to be able to access, but doesn't necessarily mean for me that it's a partner for the university. So that's where we're starting to move around that. Our goal is that the employer dashboards might trigger some of those questions like, hey, I want to be on it. I've been working with you. How come we don't? That might open the door for us to have those more fruitful conversations with these employers who want to do their own thing, which is fine. But also, do they hit some of these category or insight that we are thinking about from the university level? Or I should say from the departmental level, that we ultimately get to the university level.
There's another question in the Q&A.
Oh.
box for you, Gerald, from Mark. Question about career service website, which I know you probably have some thoughts on.
First, if you haven't worked with UConnect, not shameless plug here, but do, right? They've been fantastic. And one of the key aspects is if you can find things on the website, they automatically cancel you out. Sadly, we are a cancel culture spaces, right? If employer or alumni or students or prospective students cannot find information on your website, that means it's not helpful for them. I'm not encouraging you to add everything on it, but it's really think about what may center important things into your website for a key area. So we actually move on from the UConnect website. We move some of the things around to highlight key aspect, to remove some of the pages to be more the menu option rather than front and center, to help streamline that with the less and more still scenario. So hopefully that answered the questions. I know it's at time. Don't want to hold colleagues up. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn pretty often. I'm on UConnect, the Career Everywhere community. We appreciate taking the time to chat with me today. Meredith, it's always great to see you. I look forward to seeing you in person potentially.
Yeah,
in a nice space in Boston in the summertime. So folks, if you have more questions, thank you. Feel free to reach out. Until next time, see you guys later.
That's all for this episode of Career Everywhere. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to hit subscribe and rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time.